City Library. Welcome to Graphic Novel Day. My name is Daniel Elkin. I'm an English teacher at Bitney Prep High School and the president of the Grass Valley-based nonprofit Fieldmouse Press. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about comics and the comics arts. Before I get into that, though, I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what Fieldmouse Press is and what we do. Fieldmouse Press is a newly formed independent press committed to the comics arts. We believe that the comics arts are an essential part of the world in which we live, and we exist to enhance the contributions of the comics arts to society, educate the general public, and enrich the comics arts generally. We believe that criticism of the comics arts is equally essential for the betterment of the form, education of the public, and to give the comics arts a place for reflection, discernment, and connection with the larger world. So now that you know who I am and what Fieldmouse Press does, let's get into the heart of this presentation. What are the comics arts? Good old Charlie Brown. When I talk about comics, a lot of people think of comic strips. You know, the ones that are run in newspapers. Charlie Brown is one of those iconic figures that has entered into worldwide cultural consciousness for the past 70 or so years. And while the Charlie Brown and the rest of the Peanuts gang and other comics are certainly comics, they are not the entirety of comics. You probably recognize this dude. Another thing that people think about when I talk about comics are superheroes. Superheroes are the dominant genre in the world of comics, hands down. A rather sizable industry has been created around them. While superhero comics are still being published today and they suck up the majority of the profits from and coverage of comics worldwide, in recent years they seem to have become a form of intellectual property that is owned by massive corporations who seem to be pivoting to a great degree away from printed comics and further into movies and television. Are superhero comics comics? Absolutely. Do they encompass the entirety of comics? No. Comics arts contain so much more than just superhero comics or comic strips. Comics arts also contains slice of life comics like Standstill by Olivia Fredericks, strange stories of connection and empowerment like DJ Thinker by Joo-Young Kim, daily diary comics like this series called The Lighthouse in the City by Colonel Christian Crumple, philosophical ruminations like Anna Heifetz's The Artist, surreal explorations of the absurdity of the human condition, model conversations by Nick Francis, expressions of existential angst like Near Death Flying Turtle by Tom Lake, or autobiography comics like Phone Book by Lucia Park. As you can see, comics are not just gag strips or spandex-clad heroes dealing out justice with their fists or, laser eyes. Comics are large. They contain multitudes. Comics are a unique form of media that function like no other artistic expression. In his 1993 seminal work on comics called Understanding Comics, the Hidden Art, cartoonist and author Scott McCloud tried to nail down a working definition of comics. He said they are juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information and or to produce an aesthetic response to the viewer. While there are some limitations to this definition that McCloud wasn't able to anticipate in the early 90s, it still works as a pretty good platform to spring. Notice in his definition the focus is on words, images, and deliberate sequence. So remember I said that comics are a unique form of media that function like no other artistic form of expression. This is because they require the reader to interact with the art in a manner that is incredibly personal. Matter of fact, comics cannot do the job of being comics without you, reader. By the way, this is an image of Jack Kirby. If you like Marvel superheroes, you should thank Jack Kirby. You should probably thank him more than that other guy, Stan Lee. If you ever want to understand how corporate comics work, you should do some research into Jack Kirby. But I digress. So let's look at how comics work. Here we have two images of a dude in a tux wearing a top hat. It's quite dandy. In isolation, each one of these images are static. They're like a snapshot of the moment. One where the dude has his hat on. There's some anticipation here, but no movement. Next image, the dude has raised his hat. When you put the two images next to each other, though, you we suddenly have movement and time. We call the frame around each image a panel. We call the space around each panel the gutter. It is here in the gutter that our brain works. It is here that we connect the two images and we create movement. Scott McCloud calls this phenomenon closure, and it is an aspect of comics that is unique to the medium. Once again, here's a series of basically static images of someone's eyes opened and closed, placed next to each other. This makes our brain connect them. In that connection, we create movement out of the static images. And by creating movement, we also create a sense that time is passing. Once again, Cloud calls this closure. Here too, notice how the gutter works. In that space, because of the juxtaposition of the images, you, the reader, fill in the narrative. Is this funny? Full of tension? It can be any of these things because you have created the story. In Understanding Comics, the Hidden Art, McCloud kind of wraps up his explanation of how comics work, or at least specifically, the concept of closure with this image. I may have drawn an axe being raised in this example, but I'm not the one who let it drop or decided how hard the blow, who screamed, or why. That, dear reader, was your special crime. Each of you committing it in your own style. As you can see, what makes comics so unique of an art form is that it relies so much more heavily on the reader's interaction with the form to make meaning, to convey story, or to express an emotional or aesthetic response. To illustrate how comics work specifically in terms of the choices the artist makes, here's a sequence of panels from the Dark Horse comic series Hellboy by Mike Mignola. So first we have a fishy-looking guy saying, "Is that a monkey?" Next, we have a character you may know as Hellboy saying, "He's got a gun." In the third panel, we have the monkey with the gun. Now, this sequence has a particular logic to it that is easy to follow. And most people see the payoff in panel 3 as humorous. This is intentional on part of the artist. But what if we were to shift things around? Notice how the movement of the panel changes the tone entirely. Here, ending with "he's got a gun" alters the emotional tone significantly. The situation moves from humorous to maybe dangerous. There's more tension, less laughs. Shifting things again, we revert to humor, but a much different sense of funny than the original layout. How cartoonists want to tell their story is dependent on so many things, from their art to their layout to how they use text. It all manipulates the audience, leads them to where the cartoonist wants them to go, while still depending on the reader to make sense through closure. Comics are pretty amazing, right? There are so many to choose from. There's a comic book for everybody. There are so many amazing small comics publishers putting out some spectacular comics. For example, there's Fantagraphic Books from Seattle, Washington. There's Uncivilized Books from Minneapolis. There's Kilgore Books and Comics from Denver, Colorado. There's Silver Sprocket from San Francisco. There's Diskette Press from outside of Detroit. There's Tinto Press, also in the Denver area. There's Kiao, which is from Stockholm, Sweden. There's Breakdown Press from the UK. Shortbox, also from the UK. Avery Hill, another London-based publisher. Conundrum Press is from Nova Scotia, Canada. And then the aptly named Good Comics, also from. You can find amazing work online, but you can also attend comic book shows. And I'm not talking about traipsing off to San Diego in the summer for that mega mind-blowing extravaganza of Comic-Con. There are a ton of small press comics conventions that happen all the time. Well, when we're not in a pandemic. Starting off in California, there's the San Francisco Zine Fest. There's the San Diego Zine Fest. There's the Claremont Zine Fest. There's the East Bay Alternative Book and Zine Fest in Oakland. There's the LA Zine Fest. Across the country, there's Comic Sorts Brooklyn. There's Dink in Denver. Short Run in Seattle. There's Mocha, Massachusetts. Mice in Cambridge. There's one of my favorite ones, Small Press Expo, held every year in Bethesda, Maryland. And then there's one of these huge festivals in Toronto called TCAF. There are just so many amazing books being published by spectacular cartoonists. There's books like Mimi and the Wolves by Alabaster Vizla. No Better Words by Carolyn Nowak. See Me by Sophia Foster Dimino. There's books by Tara Booth, by Eva Mueller, by Jed McGowan, by Kelsey Roten, by Roman Murdoch, by Ezra Clayton Daniels and Ben Passmore. Your Mother's Fox by Niv Sekhar. Then there's Alienation by Inez Estrada. I could extol the virtues of each of these spectacular books, but there's even more, like Heather Roberts' Rat Tot, or Stud by Michael DeForge. So I've been talking for a while. If you want to find out more about these types of comics and so much more, Fieldmouse Press can help. In January of this year, we started our online literary magazine for comics called SOLRAD. SOLRAD are what comics people, those wavy lines that they use around light sources to indicate both light and heat. We at SOLRAD publish essays and interviews about comics, comic artists and publishers. We also have a section called SOLRAD Presents, where we curate comics that are serialized weekly. We do, of course, comics reviews. We've done a whole week on High-Fitch the artist. We also do excerpts and previews from upcoming books. We even print our own original comics. SOLRAD, you can find us all here at www.solrad.com. There's also a plethora of other websites that cover these types of comics. There's the Comics Journal, there's Broken Frontier, there's The Beat, there's Multiversity Comics, Publishers Weekly, a great site called Women Write About Comics. And that's pretty much my presentation. If you ever have any questions about comics, I'm always open to chat. Send an email to Elkin at fieldmouse.press, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. And if you really want to support the work that Fieldmouse Press is doing, we have a donate page both on SOLRAD and at www.fieldmouse.press. We're a 501c3 profit. All your donations are tax deductible. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.
All right, Daniel, thank you for your presentation. That was fascinating. We don't have any comments on our Facebook page, but do you have any follow-up on after watching your video? Is there anything that you think you missed or you want to expand upon?
I guess I would just say that there's an amazing, spectacular, unbelievable amount of comics out there. And all you got to do is look for them and you'll be rewarded handsomely.
I do want to point out that we posted a little bit earlier today about a library online comic convention that's happening throughout the month of July. You can read huge amount of comics free online, but then at the end of July, I think on the 20th through the 30th, they're actually doing kind of a convention style virtually. So they'll have workshops and all sorts of podcasts and things that people can attend for free. So that link is on is on our Facebook right now. If you want to scroll down a little bit, you should be able to see it. So that's a fun, cool thing that we're able to do even if we can't do Comic-Con this year.
Right.
All those conventions looked really cool, and I'm really sad we're missing some of them, but hopefully
Yeah.
we'll be able to supplement that a little bit. Daniel, can I ask what comics are you reading right now, or have you read recently?
Let's see. I just read Day of the Corvid by Spencer Hicks, which is so right after California went on lockdown, he took to his drawing board and started doing a page a day kind of thing, and created this strange little comic. It's kind of fun to read. Let's see. I've got some books by Jeff Zedek. He took yearbook photos from the years 1960 to the years 2016 from all over the country, and then just started drawing them, and it becomes kind of hypnotic and wonderful. Let's see what else I got here. Art Life by Catherine Oslet, sort of an exploration of what it means to be an artist in all the various mediums, and also what it means to be a parent, it's a really amazing book. I really recommend this one very much. Got a few more. I've got Spring Rain by Andy Warner right here. This is about his, it's called A Graphic Memoir of Love and Madness and Revolutions during his time in the Middle East, during a lot of upheaval. It's a really interesting comic as well. And then there's a huge pile right next to me.
That's great. Yeah, I haven't actually gotten to, I've moved recently, and I haven't gotten to my box full of my graphic novels. I'm kind of sad I missed them now. I should have my stack right next to me too.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that you do publish some graphic novels. Can you tell some of our viewers who might be interested in creating their own, what that looks like, how that process works?
Well, right now since we're just pretty brand new here, we're mostly working in the digital sphere right now. And we have a submission link on our website, and people can go to and submit their comics. I would suggest that you look at the kind of work that we've done before, just to get a sense of what it is that we're kind of looking for. If you go to a lot of the other publishers that I mentioned as well, there's places that they could take submissions. And I would just recommend that people just start putting their work up online as well. Start a website and just start putting your work up there, and then promoting yourself, and you never know where that leads.
Okay, that's great. So are there any comics that are coming out soon that you're excited about?
Oh, goodness. It's sort of endless. That's the beauty of comics, is that comics have sort of a low entry point where all you need is paper and a pencil, basically, and maybe access to a copier and maybe a stapler, and you can make your own comic. So they come out all the time. See, one I'm looking forward to the most right now is by an artist named Julia Graffer. It's called Vision. She had sort of serialized it a little bit, and now it's coming out in a full collection by Fantagraphics Books. Should be out, I think, next month. And it's an amazing piece of work. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Okay, that does sound exciting.
Yeah.
So if someone was just getting into graphic novels, just starting to explore that, where would you say is a good place to start?
Well, certainly go to your library and talk to your librarian. If you, I guess it depends on sort of what you're interested in. There are comics for everyone. There's comics for children. There's comics for people who like science fiction. There's comics certainly for people who like sci-fi. I didn't even talk about all the Japanese comics, the manga. Really, if you are interested in comics or interested in jumping into comics, sort of decide kind of what kind of comics you might be interested in, and then go to all maybe the websites that I had mentioned, or we have a shop in town also here in Grass Valley, and maybe you could go talk to them, or you could always email me as well, and I'd be glad to sort of lead you in that direction.
Okay, great. And Yeah, so like there are comics for every like classic genre, right? So if you're interested in like memoirs or science fiction or historical fiction, there's something for everybody, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
great.
And like I said in my presentation, reading prose is one thing, or watching a movie is another thing. Reading comics really engages you in a much different way than those other forms of media. And you have a much different experience, either learning about somebody or an event, or just seeing a piece of art through comics than you would in any other media. So, like I said, I can't recommend comics enough.
So you're a teacher. Do you ever bring comics into the classroom? And if so, what does that look like?
I teach at Bitney Prep High School, and I've actually had a comic book class for a couple of years. And we also do a thing called Intercession, where we just spend a week sort of doing whatever fun thing that we want to do. And I've taught comic book classes during that as well. Basically, we talk a little bit about what it is that makes comics comics. Then we go through some various comics. Typically, let's see, the past we've gone through Watchmen, which is a pretty famous graphic novel, and sort of look at how comics are constructed. And then we just sort of start making our own comics. We go through the steps of sort of pitching an idea, what it is that the student wants to do their comic on, and we sort of talk about that process. Then we have students write a script for the comic. Then they do thumbnails where they sort of lay out what the comic's going to be. And then they just sort of go page by page. And by the end of it, we've got their own book, and then we sort of bind it all together and distribute it amongst the class. And it's great. It really is. It's one of my favorite things to teach.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember back when I went to library school, I was talking to a school librarian. I think she taught in like a, goodness, I can't think of the teaching style, but it was a specialty. It wasn't Montessori, but it was something similar. And she said, oh, we're comics or graphic novels don't fit in our school. They don't fit in our teaching style. And I had an issue with that, but I wasn't able to really find the words for it because I fell in love with manga in college, and have explored graphic novels ever since. And one of my favorite books is actually the graphic novel version of a book I read when I was a child, The Girl Who Owned a City. And it's just it's such a different format, but I don't think it's any less. And I feel like it does kind of get that stigma a little bit. Have you kind of run across that stigma, and how do you respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, comics have long had this sense about them that they're juvenile, or they're for kids, or they're not respectable. And there's a long history of that. I think we're moving away from that to a great degree. I think comics have definitely come into classrooms a lot more. There's even university programs around comics, not just creating comics, but studying comics as a valid form of art. What my response to people who say those sorts of things to me is, what comics have you read? And can I show you this? And that tends to usually change people's minds quite a bit. Once they get a sense of the things that are out there that they may not have seen before, they understand that there is some value to that. There's also been a lot of studies about using comics to help teach literacy in the younger grades. And there's a lot of positive feedback or studies about that, how comics pairing visual and words together really does help teach reading in and of itself. If you look at early readers, those are picture books, and picture books are a sort of an early form of comics. So it makes a lot of sense that it works that way.
Okay. We do have one comment on our Facebook feed now. Eve Rose Gething says hi.
Hello.
So hi, Eve. Thanks for joining us today. Do you have any final comments for us, Daniel?
Once again, just read more comics.
Read more comics. Well, again, you can always reach out to us here at the library. You can call your local branch or just go ahead and call the main branch at 530-265-7050 and we'll help you find something. Or you can email Daniel. He is our resident expert in his company, Fieldmouse Press. They're our local graphic novel and comic group. So it's awesome to have you guys here in our community because we do have this great artistic community, and that is such a wonderful way to express arts and tell stories. I do love that you showed us that graphic novel of how that novelist was dealing with COVID-19. That's something that we would love to see. We are doing a archive right now of whatever you feel like creating. We would love to add a graphic novel of that. So if anybody feels the urge to put down their experiences of what's happening right now as a historical moment, we'll keep that in the Doris Foley Library for Historical Research. It's going to be an archive that we'll have, and people will be able to look back on this moment in time, and we can see what we're experiencing. So yeah, I love that you're what you're doing over there at Fieldmouse Press, and thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.